Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda McFarlane. I'm an event marketing and communications professional and a proud graduate of the University of Guelph's BBRM program. This year, I've had the pleasure of teaching equine management in the University of Guelph's Bachelor of BioResource Management Equine Management program and serving as part of the Equine Industry Symposium committee. Welcome to the 2022 Equine Industry Symposium. Whether an owner, competitor, facility manager, trainer, coach, official, recreational rider, researcher, or any other myriad of other roles, everyone involved in the horse industry faces themes that are common to all of us and require our collective attention. These include things like the welfare of the horse and the long-term health and growth of our industry, developing standards to keep abreast of legislation, societal expectation, best evidence-based practices, and fiscal realities in order to get and stay ahead, rather than to be followers. The purpose of the University of Guelph Equine Industry Symposium is to address these long-term and big picture trends and issues and frame common purpose. The role of the university is to seek truth and understanding and to assist in education and dissemination of knowledge. The role includes encouraging and participating in open discussion where diverse views and perspectives can be presented and critically examined, always with a view to increasing understanding. The hope is that in this process, the University of Guelph will improve life for everyone. The University of Guelph's Equine Industry Symposium is hosted by students in the Bachelor of BioResource Management Equine Management degree program. Tonight and throughout the course of this event, you'll be hearing from students, from incredible speakers, and from our featured speaker, Ekholm Fry. Nina will be with us throughout the event, leading us through our journey of learning about horses and human health and learning. Nina, thank you for your efforts in putting together the speaker program for this event and for being with us all week. And with that, I'll pass it over to BBRM student Marina Smith to get us started.
Hi, my name is Marina Smith. Welcome to the 2022 Equine Industry Symposium, Horses in Human Health and Learning. To start us off tonight, I'd like to share some information about the Bachelor of BioResource Management Equine Management degree program. The program is the first of its kind, geared towards developing equine industry professionals. The program is a blend of both business and equine science, including courses in biology, physiology, and behavior, in addition to accounting, economics, and business development courses. It combines both hands-on and lecture-style learning and prepares graduates for careers that require leadership and management skills. What I enjoy most about the program are the smaller class sizes in the equine courses that allows you to create a strong connection with professors and your classmates. Next, I would like to thank our partners. Ontario Equestrian and Equine Guelph are longtime partners of the symposium, helping to organize and promote the event. We want to say a special thank you to Hilary Gregory at Ontario Equestrian for her role in running the Zoom platform for the event. We'd like to thank returning platinum sponsor, KX 94.7, Canada's #1 country radio station, serving the communication of Hamilton, Burlington, Oakville, and the rest of the Golden Horseshoe from Niagara to the western boundaries of Toronto, and home to the Canadian Country Music Association's 2014 Personalities of the Year, Toff and Melissa. And thank you to Schlees Saddlery Services and Golden Horseshoe PEMF Therapy, who have partnered with us this year as well. Thanks to their contribution, we're able to raffle off some fantastic prizes tonight. So by attending each night, you're automatically entered for our daily raffles. Schlees has provided a free saddle fitting appointment to give away each night. These sessions are valued at $179 each. And the Golden Horseshoe PEMF Therapy is sponsoring our second raffle prize for a tax shop gift card. The winners of each night will be announced at the beginning of our next session, which is tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So tune in again tomorrow to find out whether you've won one of these awesome prizes. If you are unable to tune in, we will also be sending an email to the winners and announcing it on all of our socials. In lieu of speaker gifts for the event, we will also be making donations to organizations that work with horses in human health and learning. Thank you for participating. And thank you to all of our speakers for sharing their knowledge with us during this year's Equine Industry Symposium. Tonight, we will hear from featured speaker Ekholm Fry from the University of Denver and Equine Industry Symposium founder and University of Guelph equine behavior researcher, Dr. Katrina Merkies. This session will include an overview of horses in human health and learning and a discussion about human-horse interactions and various services in current research. Nina will be with us for all 3 nights of this year's Equine Industry Symposium. With that, I am pleased to introduce our featured speaker, Nina Ekholm Fry. Nina is the Director of Equine Programs at the Institute for Human-Animal Connection at the University of Denver, Colorado, USA, where her work encompasses therapeutic human-horse interactions in equine behavior and welfare. She is an adjunct professor in the Graduate School of Social Work and the Graduate School of Professional Psychology, and leads the Postmaster Equine Assisted Mental Health Practitioner Certificate Program. For the past 15 years, she has focused on horses and human services, specializing in the inclusion of equine interactions in psychotherapy and counseling. Nina is a board member of the American Hippotherapy Association, past chair of the Certification Board for Equine Interaction Professionals, and previously served as the chief editor of the HETI Journal, International Research and Practice, published by the International Federation of Horses in Education and Therapy. Nina has a background as a mental health professional, specializing in trauma treatment as a competitive rider, riding instructor, adaptive riding instructor, and equine behavior consultant. She teaches equine behavior at Yavapai College and is actively engaged in national and international organizations for both human and equine health. She has a particular interest in applied ethics and social justice perspectives within human-animal interactions, including human-horse conflict. It's easy to see that Nina is going to be a fantastic source of information for us throughout the event, and I'm going to leave it to her for now.
Hi, everyone. It is a pleasure being here. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you to the organizers of the Equine Industry Symposium and for wanting to focus on our topic this year, horses in human health and learning. It is my wish as the featured speaker and also the person that will be with you throughout these 3 days that these excellent speakers will be able to convey a professional and science-based understanding of this topic that can seem a little bit confusing at times. What are horses doing in human health and learning services? You were given a brief introduction of myself already. I'm based in Denver, Colorado, originally from Finland. I work with human-horse interactions and human services. I also work with equine behavior and welfare. Again, a pleasure being here. So my role opening our symposium and providing the first session is really to get us oriented to topics that we'll be going into in much more depth over the course of these 3 days. These topics include understanding horses in human health and learning from a professional perspective. As I mentioned, there's a lot of things written about horses and a lot of words and phrases used to sort of make this area perhaps a little confusing, but our hope is that with our excellent speakers, we'll be able to clarify some things and also invite your questions. I'll be talking a bit about terminology, which does matter, even though it's maybe just words, maybe not. We'll get some clarity around all the things people say and what they actually mean when it comes to horses in human health and learning. I'll briefly touch on the role of the horse. This is the same kind of horse that's present in all areas of the equine industry, but what happens when horses are part of the human industries or the human side of things? The professional service areas that we'll dive deep into in these 3 coming days, and some brief final notes on equine welfare, as well as some issues in research. I know a lot of people have come to this symposium with perhaps some pre-existing information and knowledge and are interested in the topic of research, and we'll hear more about that with our second speaker, also Dr. Katrina Merkies, here this evening. So needless to say, you are likely here at this symposium because you are drawn to horses, because you work with horses, because you live with horses, or you are simply compelled by horses, or maybe you are a human health and learning professional and you are interested in this thing that people talk about, where horses are incorporated in these services. But it's true for all our interactions with horses, whether they are in a professional health setting or in a leisure horse industry setting, that we might have some common positive experiences from interacting with them. These experiences can be social interactions also not just with the horses themselves, but also with other people who are around horses. It tends to be quite a social endeavor. You might find that with horses, you might want to do things and work toward goals and come up with goals for yourself, for you and the horse you're with. And horse interactions typically do take place outdoors. So enjoying nature tends to be a big part of being with horses in any setting. We do get outlets for caregiving behaviors. We do quite a lot of those when we are with horses, regardless of setting. We have emotional and relational experiences, and we gain some exercise and movement. So these are just some general things that happen in our interactions with horses all over. But when we're going to be talking about professional services that incorporate interactions with horses in the human health and learning sectors or industries, we think about these positive experiences that arise for many in interactions with horses in a more professional and intentional manner. And that's really what this whole area is about. So as we get started, maybe some of you think of horses as the point that, oh, a horse is there. So it might be something like horse therapy if there is some health professional around. This would be a conceptualization or understanding that the animal in this case is the point. But as you'll find here in North America, here in the US and in Canada, that the way we think about professional services in the human sector that incorporates horses, we actually focus on the human provider of the service. So meaning that if you are going to provide physical therapy and you're going to be utilizing the movement of the horse as a treatment tool in your treatment approaches, it can't be therapy unless you are in fact a physical therapist who has training in this. So simply being with a horse in a setting where somebody facilitates something that's not just riding or horsemanship instruction doesn't make it a therapy or even therapeutic. This, again, we're focusing on what is the professional's role, and that dictates the service they're providing where horses are incorporated. And with that comes some interesting developments in terminology. And I tell you, mostly journalists and sort of websites and places all around tend to talk about words like horse therapy or equine therapy. That sounds to me a little bit like it could be therapy for the horse, and it doesn't tell us anything about, is this psychotherapy or counseling? Is this occupational therapy? Is this a learning service, a special education service, social emotional learning? It doesn't tell us any details. And I have some recommendations for us as we go forward with our symposium, and for anybody interested in various human services where horses are incorporated, how to decipher what people are saying and what they might mean with different things. So service confusion, meaning I'm not sure if I'm getting a therapy service or a learning service or something else, tend to start with terminology confusion. And my recommendation is to always use and ask for descriptive language to better understand what we're talking about. Many of you have heard the term equine assisted or equine assisted. The term animal assisted can also be used. What does this mean? The descriptive language is in orange. It means to include horses into a human health or a learning service. But you want to ask, what is the service? What approaches, for instance, social emotional learning approaches, are taken within this service where the horse is also part? Because the point isn't the horse in human services. It's still the human professional and the service you're given, but these services can be perhaps greatly enhanced by being outdoors and interacting with horses in professional ways. Same thing with this term, equine assisted therapy. I'd like to know, am I receiving mental health counseling or clinical psychotherapy, or am I receiving speech language therapy? So it's really helpful to ask for or describe, if you're a person who provides services, what kind of service is it? What kind of professional are you? And lead with that. Horse interactions are not a therapy or a treatment. They are incorporated as a technique or the movement of the horse as a treatment tool while the professional does the things that they're trained for, typically at a master's or doctoral level, if we're talking healthcare. And in the learning area, that can be credentialed teachers or other coaches or facilitators that have existing frameworks for what they do. And finally, if I can give you anything to take away in this more theory-focused first part of this talk, is that the term equine therapy is discouraged because, again, it doesn't tell us anything about what happens, and maybe it's a service for the horse. And it's really helpful to have clarity when we're talking about human services. On the screen are also a couple of resources, a couple of published papers that have promoted clearer terminology and ease of kind of use and access to the services that incorporate horses. So I've been talking a lot about horses, and even though the horse doesn't make the service, the professional does, there's still some things to know here about the horse, and we'll hear much more about this in the presentation next from Dr. Merkies. But a few points that I wanted to briefly make is to understand horses in human health, in therapy services, and in learning services, that the horse does not become a therapist, not at least in the sense of professional credentialing and licensing and healthcare systems, that kind of thing. We might carry that idea or thought as a soothing thought in our own spirit, but since we're taking this professional and scientific approach to really being clear, what is this all about, then it's not helpful to call the horse the therapist, because there's already a person who is a therapist there. And another point that's quite popular to think about, and I find it interesting talking to people in the equine industry who work every day with sport horses or leisure horses or horses in other sectors, that the horses vary greatly based on their individual temperaments and histories and experiences. And they don't just exist to mirror you. They have their own things going on. So when you incorporate horses in learning services or in therapy services, the horse doesn't sort of tell us some secret about somebody, but the interactions with horses, the relational experiences can be really valuable and can be intentionally put to play by the professionals who are involved. But I want you all to sort of not fall into these typical pitfalls in this area. And here's another one. Just being with horses doesn't create a whole new service, like a whole separate therapy service or learning service, because what a professional service is designated, defined. There's some standards. There's typically some public trust in the person who provides the service. And they are using, their skills, their training and background to provide that service to you. And horse interactions can be incorporated. Again, we'll hear lots more details about how this might look in all the different areas of therapy and learning throughout this symposium. So more details to come. I'm just giving you the overview here. And my final point here of the pitfalls is that horses don't have access to, and this is actually not a bad thing at all, a human concept like therapy. To understand that humans have therapy needs, and to solve those therapy needs, another human is trained to do something, and then eventually a horse is there too. Those are very abstract human concepts that really aren't of use to horses. but we feel that they might sense this. But it's important that we step back and say, hey, what matters to horses? And what matters to us? And those things can be different things. And it doesn't take away from the enhancing elements that horses do bring to these human sectors. So what are horses generally? Again, I'm giving you sort of a general overview here. What can horses do in these human services? The horse in their environment provides the opportunity for relationships and experiential practice. And this is not necessarily just to practice with a horse so you later can practice with a human. It means that we have unique and specific relationships to both our conspecifics, meaning our fellow species members, our humans, and also to other animals. They're not just a stepping stone for us. Because as a species, we actually thrive on having multi-species relationships. And when it comes to the use of the horse's movement, high quality movement can be skillfully manipulated. Again, this is within the professional scope of certain professions who use movement to treat. And so this, in certain circumstances, can be done. It doesn't mean that every single horse's movement in every situation does something therapeutic, but in a certain professional setting and with the correct parameters, this can very much be true. We'll hear more about this tomorrow on Tuesday in the symposium. The horse does provide the opportunity for those caregiving behaviors. We are social mammals just like them, and we thrive on being connected to others, and also some co-regulatory behaviors, simply meaning that we adjust how we go about things based on somebody else's need. And hopefully that need is to be calm and relaxed and content. And finally, the horses, again, generally in human services, provide opportunity for touch in a different way than perhaps between people, for movement, and a sense of connectedness that many people who are around horses can speak to. Even if we are different from them, most of us horse people, at least, you'll recognize yourself here if you're in this symposium, do feel a deep sense of connection to this other species. And these are all elements that professionals, human service professionals, can make use of within the way they work and why the horse is there. They don't have to be something that they're not. They can just be themselves. As you know, we have 3 days of the Equine Industry Symposium, and we will dedicate time in the coming days to various common service areas where horses are incorporated. Tomorrow, we'll talk about 2 broad therapy areas, and the day after, on Wednesday, we'll talk about learning services. We'll also talk about a 3rd area, which I have shaded out here in my overview because I'll get back to it in a moment. But just to give you a taste of the in-depth talks to come, we have talks in the category of therapy. So those are human healthcare services by credentialed therapists. And we have a talk in the area of learning. What are learning and education services? Could be school related, or could be self-improvement and growth and team building. You'll hear lots more about these with examples coming up. But in short, equine movement can be used by various physical therapists, occupational therapists, and speech language pathologists who have additional training, professional level training in how to incorporate the movement of the horse in a skillful manner in line with their professional practice standards. And here, the horse typically is carrying a patient on their back. The other broad area of therapy has to do with mental health therapy, so psychotherapy and clinical mental health counseling. Here, the therapist uses psychological theories to treat mostly verbally, can also be somatically or having to do with the body. And the horse is included or incorporated. The interaction is as a treatment technique, as part of how that therapist works. And this is, again, professional and organized. It's not, oh, I have a horse and I guess I can do this. There are professional standards, credentialing boards, and those are important questions to ask of somebody if you are seeking a healthcare service. What is your training? How do you conceptualize this? Do you think the horse does the treatment and you sort of stand back and I still pay you, lots of money? So it's important to be professional, but also seek out professionals in these areas. And the learning area, this encompasses everything from credentialed teachers who include horse interactions in their special education curricula. It can be life coaching, can be executive coaching and team building, any sort of facilitation that's done for human learning and growth in the education sector. And the final area that we'll hear about the last day of this symposium is one that I'm excited for you to hear the speaker to really help clarify. What is this horsemanship area that I think a lot of you have heard about? Therapeutic riding and adaptive riding. So we'll learn much more about that, but surprisingly, this is not part of the therapy area. Adaptive riding, is therapeutic riding means the exact same thing, is instruction of riding and horsemanship adapted to a person's ability. If you're a person with a visible or invisible disability, you too may want to recreate with horses and have those potentially positive experiences that we talked about earlier. And an adaptive riding center, an adaptive riding instructor makes that recreation, makes that engagement possible. So as you can hear, this is not technically a human health and learning service. It's actually a riding instruction service. But it's important to include the conversation about this because sometimes there's confusion about what is adapted riding or therapeutic riding. Is it a therapy? Is it a learning service? How do I pay for it? All of those things you'll hear more about. To end my overview here in the final 5 minutes or so, I wanted to talk about a very important topic, which is the welfare of the horse and, of course, of everyone involved. But fortunately, when we attend to the well-being of the horses that we incorporate, that we include, that we place in these human service areas, when we attend to their welfare, we lower risk for everyone and we increase comfort for everyone in the setting. So fortunately, there's been quite a lot of attention to the welfare of horses who are in these human services. I emphasized this earlier, but the horses, of course, who are part have to have some pretty specific trained behaviors that you'll hear more about in each area during the symposium. But overall, their basic needs in their living environment, their need to be interacted with in a way that aligns with their learning, using learning theory and scientific ways of training and handling horses, are of course the same here. And maybe so, because now we're talking about really improving human mental and physical health, not just recreation and sport, perhaps we have to pay extra close attention to the health of everyone in that little system, in that therapy session, or in that learning lesson. So extra attention might need to be placed here. And we might need to sort of rethink some of the things that we say and do and act, around horses in other parts of the horse industry when the expressed purpose is to have health and well-being. Does it work if we call the horse a doofus and give him a smack? I don't think so. So additional specific attention needs to be placed here on the role of the horse, the experience of the horse, the experience of power or lack of power that they do have in our human settings. There's a lot of different things that horses do in these human services, therapy services and learning services. There's not a set sort of cookie cutter set of tasks that a horse needs, because sometimes they might be carrying people on their backs. Sometimes they don't. And those are very different skill sets and learned behaviors that a horse needs. And those tasks, however, like being touched or being led, or again, being sat on, or somebody to experience the movement of the horse, they're not necessarily different from the demands, I want to say, that horses experience in other settings. And we'll hear more about this very interesting point that I've highlighted there in italics, that human emotionality is likely not more impactful than the physical task asked for most horses. And I'll let Dr. Merkies talk more about this, but in other words, horses, of course, sense and experience our emotional states in various ways, but that might not be the primary source of, let's say, stress or discomfort or confusion or comfort. It might be, well, I'd like you to stand still when I place a patient on your back. That physical task might be more important for the horse to be prepared for. And my final point here is that practitioner knowledge and attitudes may not be aligned with best available evidence. This is a theme throughout the equine industry. There's lots of good studies of just assessing horse communication and behavior, and how people sometimes, a lot of times, get the horse's communication wrong or assume things about horses. This is very natural. We have some cognitive barriers as humans when it comes to trying to understand a different species and sort of using ourselves as a model, our own thoughts and our own emotions. But that's not always true. And we can actually put horses at risk when we assume that they have human-specific characteristics, or when we don't assume they have the same shared basic emotions. So there are, even if people are eager to help, it is important to watch for. We might trip ourselves up here and not do our horses justice for their needs, and call them a therapy horse, but not give them enough forage. Those are conflicts that we have to be very careful about when we talk about horses in human services. There's a great resource from an organization called iOhio, and I had the pleasure of working on this resource called Guidelines for Equine Care and Welfare and Equine Training and Handling, that really spell out in more detail what are things to consider when horses are part of these human services. And like I said, those guidelines might be applicable across the horse industry. My final point before we actually transition to more research is just to give you, to situate you when it comes to research. A lot of you are very interested in research. What does the research say? Who's doing research? What's happening? Is there research on this? Is this something that we don't know anything about? Well, we have hundreds, and I mean that, hundreds of peer-reviewed articles that are published in each of these areas that I mentioned. Different therapy areas with equine movement, in psychotherapy, in learning services. There's a lot out there, but we haven't been able to draw very solid conclusions because we've had some issues. And maybe not to your surprise, some of these issues I've touched on even today. People using different terms, different descriptors, people comparing a riding lesson to a therapy session. Those two things are fundamentally different. And it's very hard to say something about that if we're not clear on what category is what. And because of this, there's been some issues in study design. This is getting a little better as we are coming together using descriptive language and deciding that in North America, healthcare is based on the provider. It cannot be therapy unless a therapist is actually providing the service. But when designing studies, if we compare something that's treatment to not treatment, or if we compare leisure activities like petting horses with a therapist who uses a treatment protocol and incorporates horses there, we won't come to any strong conclusions. But I'm very confident that we are getting to the point now, which these kinds of conversations and even this symposium, that we can move forward in these research issues. This is my last slide for now, but again, you will see more of me in question and answer sessions. You're welcome to submit your questions using the Q&A feature here on the webinar. And you're just generally, of course, welcome to be in touch with me and the Institute for Human-Animal Connection. And I will now pass it back to Marina.
Thank you, Nina. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Katrina Merkies, equine behavior researcher from the University of Guelph. Dr. Merkies holds an honors Bachelor of Science in Agriculture and Animal Science and a PhD, both from the University of Guelph. She was a faculty member in the Equine Studies Department at Lake Erie College in Ohio for 4 years, but returned to Canada in 2006 to develop and implement the first equine bachelor's degree in Canada, the BBRM Equine Management Program at the University of Guelph. She maintains oversight of the BBRM program and teaches a variety of courses, including equine management, event management, equine reproduction, and equine industry projects. Dr. Merkies' passion for enlightened interactions between horses and humans has led her research program to focus on equine behavior, welfare, and management with a special interest in horse-human interaction. She has been a board member of the International Society for Equitation Science for 8 years, currently in the position of president. She also sits on the board of the Donkey Sanctuary of Canada as chair of the Animal Care Committee. Now I'll turn it over to Dr. Merkies.
Thanks so much, Marina, for that wonderful introduction. And I'm delighted to follow in Nina's footsteps and talk a little bit more about the research surrounding what we know about interacting with horses. So we are all here because we love horses and we're involved in horses in some fashion. And we seem to gain a sense of calm, a sense of courage, a sense of freedom when we interact with horses. And it's these very things that are at the core of any type of interaction, whether it's a therapeutic therapy or learning interaction. These are sort of the things that are at the essence of those interactions that we have with horses. And as we learn more about horses, we have to continually reevaluate how we approach any interaction we have with horses. And specifically when we're looking at incorporating horses in human health services. I'm a researcher, as Marina introduced, and the research that I do in my lab focuses on horse-human relationships. And we know a lot about how horses can benefit humans through various therapies, educational programs, and adaptive riding, but we don't know actually that much about what horses, how horses experience these types of interactions. And so as a researcher, I feel that my job is to give a voice to the horse and make sure that they're given the respect that they deserve because they are sentient creatures. Regardless of how horses fill our lives, the horse is a horse is a horse. It doesn't matter if we are doing dressage, riding out on the trail, jumping a course, or just being with a horse in the field. Horses have their basic needs, and Nina talked about this already. And we need to make sure that we're meeting their basic needs. There's a lot of research that's being generated by scientists all around the world. And as we learn more about horses, their anatomy, their physiology, their cognitive abilities, then we need to make sure that we're incorporating that increased knowledge into our relationship with the horse. And one of the challenges that the horse industry faces, as I'm sure you're all aware, is that we're steeped in tradition. And sometimes it's really hard to change what we're doing if things are working. But as we discover more and we learn more and we know more, then we need to do better. So when we improve just the daily care and management of the horse, then we make their world better. And if we're making their world better, then they in turn can make our world better as well. So it's a circular procedure. Yes, so as caretakers of the horses, it's our responsibility to not just give them a good life, but to give them a life worth living. So it's our ethical responsibility to do the best that we can by them. And this becomes even more important when the involvement of horses is seen through the public eye. And oftentimes this is an eye that doesn't have any experience or knowledge about horses, but they may be quick to question some of the practices that we use with horses. So right now, the spotlight of social license is currently on high performance horses. I'm sure you probably have heard of issues such as over-tightened nose bands or whip use in racing. But we need to be careful that public scrutiny may eventually come into your backyards, and we need to be able to defend our inclusion of horses in human health services and education programs by demonstrating that we are doing the best we can, that we're giving them the best care and consideration based upon scientific evidence. So behavior is our barometer. And I'm a horse behaviorist, so of course this is really important to me. But even some animal welfare scientists will say that welfare is based only on behavior, that they don't even consider resources or environment, but it's all about the behavior. So the behavior of the horse is our barometer to tell us whether we're meeting that horse's needs and hopefully exceeding that horse's needs. But we aren't very good at recognizing what horses are telling us. Oftentimes we're oblivious, we're not even paying attention, or we misinterpret their behaviors. And this has been shown in a number of studies, and most recently my grad student this past summer did a survey where participants had to categorize different horse-human interactions as either positive, slightly negative, or negative. And for example, this was one of the, this is a photo that was one of the pieces of media that the survey respondents would categorize. And in this picture, you see the horse has his head over the stall door. He's interacting with the human here and seems like he's friendly and interested. But if you take a closer look at this horse, his ears are turned backwards away from the human. There's a lot of tension around his eye. His mouth is open. You also see tension in his neck muscles. So this interaction is actually, from the horse's point of view, a slightly negative interaction. So if we fail to recognize these subtle behavioral signals, or we misinterpret them, then that has implications for our relationship with the horse and also for human safety. What sorts of behaviors should we pay attention to? So these are things that we can measure to determine how a horse will respond to different situations. So this list of behaviors here, these are all validated behaviors that have been validated in repeated studies and been correlated to physiological measurements such as heart rate or circulating cortisol, which is a hormone, a stress hormone. But behavior is a lot easier and cheaper to measure than doing physiological measurements. So when we look at a horse's behavior, some behaviors are really obvious, like if the horse is bucking or rearing or bolting, that's obvious, very overt behavior. But other behaviors such as their ear position or their latency to approach a novel object, latency means how long it takes them to approach something. These are regularly used to benchmark stress, but they required a trained eye to observe them. And part of the problem with horses is that we train them to put up with a lot of things that they may not ordinarily put up with or may not enjoy. And so the horses are trained to not display behavioral indicators. So then it becomes even more important for us to really pay attention to the subtle things, because the subtle things are always there, whereas the overt bucking, bolting, and rearing, usually we train the horse not to do those things. So it's incumbent upon us to be really good at discerning these subtle behaviors. So some of the research that has come out of my lab from all my wonderful graduate students and undergraduate students, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of these measures. And while they may not be specifically related to horses that are incorporated in human health or learning programs, they're applicable to all horses, regardless of what that horse is doing. When we look at eye blink rate, so EBR is short form for eye blink rate, in humans, we know that eye blinks will increase under social stress. So if you are giving a presentation in front of a large crowd of people, if you're nervous, that might come out as increased eye blink rate. Whereas if the human is stressed visually, so reading papers, then eye blink rate decreases. So actually this came from some of my undergraduate students who were interested to know if eye blink rate in horses would change when they're under stress. So we did a little study and we looked at eye blink rate in horses. And we exposed them to 4 different situations. We had a control situation where the horse was just out in the field with his friends. Then we had 3 different mildly stressful situations. So the first was we took them away from their friends, so they were separated. The second was they weren't fed when everyone else in the barn was being fed. And the third was a startle test where we threw a ball suddenly in front of them. And we found that their eye blink rates actually decreased during all 3 of those stressful situations. And they weren't always full blinks where the eye closed completely, but often they were half blinks as well. And then we also noticed that the horse's eyelids twitched, and that would increase during social stress. So this is a simple thing that you can just pay attention to your horse's eyes and see if their eye blink rate is increasing or decreasing. First of all, find out what's the normal baseline for your horse. Another thing we looked at was how horses respond to different pitch and tone of the human voice. And we know that horses don't necessarily understand our words or all of our words. They certainly will learn verbal cues, but they seem to respond to the tone of our voice as well. And early on, when we took riding lessons, our instructor probably told us that we shouldn't portray fear in our body or in our voice, because the horse will pick up on that. And so we wanted to see, is this actually true? And we know that horses can hear better than humans, but there wasn't a lot of research done on how horses respond to auditory stimuli. So what we did was we played a voice recording that was in a stern voice, and the same recording, the same words in a calm and pleasant voice. And we watched to see how the horses reacted to that. And indeed, the horses did move faster. They moved away from the human and moved faster when they heard the stern voice. And when they heard the pleasant voice, they actually turned to face the human, and they displayed less stress behaviors. So probably not surprising, but here we have the evidence to prove that the tone of voice that you use with the horse is important to how they're going to want to interact with us. But for horses, probably body language is much more important than auditory cues. Because the horse is a prey animal, they learn to read body language because it's important for their survival. And it also facilitates their social interactions. In the horse world, and even within different therapy services, oftentimes we have a horse in a round pen, and the human can work together with that horse in that smaller space. And so we wanted to, again, characterize how horses would respond to human body posture. In the round pen, we had a human who would face the horse and have eye-on-eye contact with the horse. And then that same person would turn away from the horse and face towards the rear of the horse. And we weren't asking the horses to do anything, but we just wanted to see how they would respond. And indeed, again, probably not surprisingly, horses did move faster when the human faced their head with eye-on-eye contact. And when the human turned away and faced their hindquarters, the horses did slow down. Contrary to what you hear when you're watching movies about horses or with horses or TV shows, there's often a lot of vocalization from those horses. But in reality, those of you who work around horses know that horses don't talk that much, but they do use different types of vocalizations to communicate with each other. And they're different types of vocalizations, whether it's a nicker or a whinny or a neigh or a snort, they do convey different social intentions. And they can also even convey information about the collar. So horses can know the sex of the collar. They can know the size of the collar based on the acoustic properties of their vocalization. But we were kind of interested in how well do we humans understand what the horses are saying. And so again, one of my grad students did a survey where the respondents would listen to a number of different horse vocalizations, and then they would rate that vocalization as being either a positive or negative vocalization, so in a positive or negative scenario, and what the arousal level of the horse was. And it was nice to see that humans were pretty good at recognizing both the valence, that is the positive or negativity, and the arousal level of the horse's vocalizations. And it didn't even matter if the people were familiar with horses or not. And that's not, again, surprising, because there is a universal acoustic structure to vocalizations across many different species of animals, and not just mammals, but reptiles and avian species. And this encoding within their vocal repertoire is recognized across species. So it's good, but again, we have to pay attention when the horse does whinny. We need to pay attention and think, well, what is that horse conveying to us? Is this a positive or negative situation? Similarly, when horses are domesticated, they're having to interact with another species, with humans. And understanding the other species is going to be really important. Being able to understand and recognize different emotions. So we were interested to know if the horses could recognize facial interactions. So no talking here, but so we showed horses sad faces, happy faces, neutral faces, and angry faces. And looked to see if the horses responded differently to those different faces. And in mammalian species, what we see with our left eye is processed in our right brain. And what we see with our right eye is processed in our left brain. And with horses, this makes it really, really easy because their eyes are on the side of their heads. So we know for sure that if they're viewing something with their left eye, it's being processed in their right brain and vice versa. And so we did note with the horses that when they were looking at the angry human, they tended to look at that human with their left eye. And the left eye is then processed in the right brain, and the right brain is important for reading emotional cues, and particularly negative ones. Conversely, for the joy or happy face, the horses looked more often with their right eye, which means that it's processed in the left brain, and the left brain is responsible for many things, of course, but responsible for social interactions. So again, just paying attention to which side or which eye your horse is looking at things with can give you information about how they're processing their environment. Then we get to the idea that I just mentioned earlier, where we've been told not to show fear around horses because the horses pick up on our fear. And again, another interesting question that we've just been handed down this knowledge for years, but it was never really tested. So in this research, we took humans who were stressed, either because they were fearful of horses or because they had physically exercised. So both people have increased heart rates, but one is increased from fear and one is increased from physical exercise. And we put them together with the horses and again watched the horses' behavior. And we found that when the horses were with the more fearful human, that their heart rate was actually lower than it was with the people who had exercised. And that the horses moved slower and carried their head lower, so both signs of relaxation around those fearful humans. So this was really rather unexpected, but has been also shown in other studies as well. And probably the reason why the horses are less, displaying less stress behaviors is because the fearful person is not expecting anything from the horse. Whereas the person who is exercising may have a higher heart rate, but they actually happen to be more familiar with horses or certainly not afraid of horses. You move differently around the horse and you may have expectations that the horse is expecting some sort of work. So it's kind of good to know that even if you have humans working with your horses who are afraid of them or don't have any experience with them, that the horses aren't going to react negatively as long as, of course, normal safety precautions are employed. So similarly, as Nina referred to in her presentation, the idea that the horse can intuit what we need and will provide emotional support is, again, maybe expecting more of them than they're cognitively able to supply for humans. And so we wanted to look at, do humans actually read our minds and know emotionally what we need, or are they responding to our body language? And so in this research, we had a human who had PTSD, and they interacted with the horse, and we watched all of the behaviors that the horses displayed. And then we had an actor who looked similar to the person who had PTSD, and they were trained by an acting coach to move around the round pen in a similar way. And so they mirrored the actions of the person with PTSD, but they had no neuro symptoms to that. And in fact, the horses did not behave differently between those two people, although they did have a higher heart rate when they were with the PTSD person versus their control. But in this case, again, we found that humans that had more horse experience, the horses were more attentive to or showed more attentive behaviors to, whereas the people who were inexperienced with horses, the horses were calmer, slower, more relaxed around. So it appears that the level of experience is a more important factor than whether we have emotional needs or not. There's lots of information on how humans view horses, and we attribute a lot of human emotions to horses. We believe that horses can feel fear, pain, of course, but also other more abstract emotions like love, jealousy, and that helps us develop this bond with a horse. When we feel that the horse has emotions, we feel like there's some reciprocal relationship there. And we love our horses, and we feel very bonded to our horses, and that bond is characterized by examples of the horse approaching us when they're in the field, for example, coming up and touching us, the horse calling to us when we show up in the barn, and this idea of the horse trusting us to take care of them if there's a frightening situation, and the horse also taking care of us during difficult times. And the idea of anthropomorphism, again, which Nina touched on, was attributing human characteristics to horses. That can be a really good thing because it allows us to give an outside view. So if we see a horse in pain, for example, we may feel their pain and be moved to do something to help that horse, call the vet. But it can be a double-edged sword, because if, for example, we feel cold, then we may think that our horse feels cold as well and put a blanket on the horse, when in fact their thermoneutral zone is very different than ours. And of course, we can put too much responsibility on the horse to be kind of the cause of our successes and our failures. And this is where the slippery slope happens, because if we're expecting the horse to take care of us or to heal us or to help us, and they don't for whatever reason, it's easy to blame the horse. Well, the horse didn't do what I needed the horse to do, when in fact, the horse was just being a horse. And the idea of that bond being reciprocal, we love our horses, but do the horses love us? Of course, we think they do, but there's really been no research that shows that they do, or at least not, we may not be asking the right question. When we look at attachment, we become attached to our horses. And the 4 pillars of attachment are proximity seeking. So the other is wanting to be close, secure base. So this is where the other partner is comfortable exploring new surroundings. Safe haven, which is where if something frightens you out in the big wide world, you come back to that partner for reassurance. And then separation distress, when you're apart from that partner, that you are distressed at being separated. And these 4 pillars of attachment have been shown obviously in humans, also in dogs, but sadly not in horses to date. The only one that really has shown anything is safe haven, where horses will work to approach a novel object or a frightening object in the presence of a human, but it also could be any human. Doesn't matter if it's a familiar or unfamiliar human. And separation distress, horses prefer company, but they prefer the company of other horses much more than they do of humans. And how we, what our attachment styles are can affect our relationship with others and also with other animals. And just quickly, so the 2 basic attachment styles based on those pillars of attachment, there's secure and insecure. So secure is being very comfortable with the other person in the relationship or the other being, and insecure is being anxious of being separated from that person, for example, or avoidant or dismissing so that you're not setting yourself up for disappointment. And we looked at the way horses behaved when they were participating with at-risk youth in a learning program, so a program that incorporated horses into learning various social skills. And we characterized the attachment style of those youth. And we found that the horses behaved less predictably towards youth that had a secure attachment style. And this, again, is a little bit surprising, but makes sense when you think of it in the context of horses being more calm and relaxed around people who are not as experienced with horses. So here, again, people who are more insecure, they're anxious, nervous. The horses were a lot calmer and steadier around those youth. And then the idea that Nina alluded to earlier about horses mirroring emotions or attitudes of the people that they interact with. And this mirroring phenomenon somehow is supposed to allow the person to visualize themselves and how the horse behaves. And again, horses likely only reacting to the human's body language and not to the human's emotional needs. And there's no evidence that there's emotional transfer between horses and humans. And the idea that horses' heart rates might synchronize with human heart rates, again, there's no concrete evidence to show that this actually happens. Similarly, the horses could distinguish different human facial expressions, anger, sadness, joy. That doesn't mean that they understand or take in that emotion that the human is feeling. It's just that they do recognize the differences. Horses will choose food over humans, sad but true, and they do prefer wither scratching to other body areas. So again, paying attention to what the horse prefers and being able to provide that to the horse. And this idea of touch, again, touch is something that is incorporated in probably almost all interactions that we have with horses. But we have to ask the question, do they like being touched? Or are there different ways that they prefer to be touched? Or are there different parts of their body that they would like to be touched? And the idea of consensual interactions versus non-consensual interactions. So is the horse a willing player in the arena with the human? Or are they there because they have to be there and they have to be touched and they have to put up with it? So paying attention again to the behaviors that the horse displays. And my PhD student is working on this research, looking at how horses respond in consensual and non-consensual touch interactions with humans. And I'm sad to say I don't have any results yet, but we have a lot of data. We're working through that, and it will be really interesting when the results do become available. So looking forward, again, the idea that there should be mutual benefit. If we are incorporating horses into human health services or learning services or education services, then there should be something in it for the horse more than just food and shelter. And we can make sure that we are considering the horse's contribution by providing agency. And agency is the capacity to ask others to do things. So looking again at those consensual interactions, is the horse a consenting partner in the activities that we're asking them to participate in? And being really attentive to the horse's behaviors, educating ourselves on the subtle behaviors that they express, knowing that there are negative behaviors, those are easy to spot, but it's the positive behavioral interactions that are more difficult to notice. And we need to provide the opportunity for horses to express those positive behaviors as well. So that's just a really brief overview. And I think that Nina and I are open to answering any questions.
Thank you so much for this really illuminating talk on some of those details, that arise from research, from scientific pursuit, and then can be applied to this specific area of thinking of horses as part of human services. And I know that because I know you and you're my colleague, I know of your research in, just equine science, and I know of your interest in the past, let's say, decade or so in these areas where again, horses are incorporated in human services. I'm curious, what has that experience been like to start thinking about this area, the theme of this symposium for your research? What are some things that were confusing at first? What are some things that you're sort of figuring out now after a decade of this?
Gosh, you make me sound old now.
Experienced, yes.
I think the biggest thing is that we still know so little. Every time I work with my grad students and we come up with a research project and we start collecting data, we come up with way more questions than we do answers. And it's fascinating, it's exciting to be able to explore all of those questions, but it's a little daunting too. So just to keep learning, keep an open mind, and keep looking for answers.
Great, great. We've gotten quite a lot of comments and questions around for me, some of my favorite studies of yours, which have to do with the interaction between a horse and a human who is emitting a certain emotional state. And then the conclusion, which is that the horses paid more attention or were a little more tense around humans who they sensed are comfortable and have expectations, which to me starts reflecting more fundamentally the position of horses in society. A question related to this was, do you think that the outcome of the study would have been different if the horse had been not used to being around humans and not kind of used to this idea of, yeah, some humans just tell me what to do, kinder or not kinder. Do you think that would have made a difference? We had a lot of questions around maybe the horse is empathetic by lowering their arousal, or maybe a horse who hasn't had these expectations or this history would have felt differently. What are some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, see, that's where you get more questions from the answers you're trying to get. Definitely the way that you set up your research is going to dictate what answers you're going to get. And your research question is always the most important thing. So if you look at horses who are naive to humans, it might be difficult, firstly, to set that up. And I feel personally that they're responding to body language probably most importantly. And your body language, if you're comfortable around horses, even if the horses aren't comfortable around you, is still going to be the same. Whereas if you're not comfortable around horses, your body, you kind of cave in on yourself, you make yourself smaller, your movements are more jerky or quiet, or you just move differently. So I think that the horses respond to the body language independent of their domesticated state. But that remains to be proven. That's just my viewpoint.
And, when we think about, these human services where we incorporate horses, some of the emphasis there is on horses who are comfortable around humans and who can expect things, and where risk can be mitigated or kept lower and comfort be kept higher. So for this context, the responses with horses who were used to humans made a lot of sense in terms of again, informing those of us who incorporate horses. Another question, we have room for about one or two more. We've got a lot of questions, and we are also approaching the end of our evening already. That's great that we have 2 more days. But another question that to me sort of ties into a lot of comments we got or questions around sort of the horse's positive experience. So one question was around the natural and more natural living environment. So I'm going to give you kind of a 2-parter here, and I have some thoughts, of course, as well, but a more natural living environment and sort of balancing that with what the person said could be health risks, and then tying this into the idea of, can horses have positive benefits from being incorporated in a human occupational situation? I think to me, those two things may be a little connected. I'm curious to hear what you think.
I think, yes, horses can benefit from their interactions with humans just as much as we can benefit. And the natural living horse, there's a lot of good parts to that, but there's also some bad parts to that. So if you're a free-ranging horse, you're on your own, right? You're within your band, but there's the big wide world out there. There's weather, there's predators, there's uneven rocky terrain, there's drought, there's fires, etc. So horses do get benefits on being domesticated in general. And I think with humans who really want to develop a relationship with a horse, on their level, that the horses definitely derive benefit from that. And if we can pay attention to what it is that they particularly like or enjoy and give them those things, not all the time necessarily, but to be able to provide that for them, then definitely they benefit. Sorry, I don't remember the first part of the question. Did I touch on that?
Yes. No, you absolutely did. And I think that there's something in here in these, when we start talking about the question or words like consent and mutual benefit, that we continually understand and keep an eye on the structures under which horses live, so that we are clear on that, you know, the horse won't get the same thing out of therapy as a human will get out of therapy. My position on these matters is we have to attend to their natural living states and needs, and we have to promote positive experiences, because otherwise the healthcare situation, the learning situation cannot meet their goals. And using, again, science to underpin this as you described. And there are risks of living out and about, but are we taking into consideration those emotional risks sufficiently? We are coming to the end here. Again, we had lots and lots of questions. I will briefly answer one that had to do with mental health and farms and things like that, by letting folks know that tomorrow there will be a specific session on psychotherapy and counseling, which will help you if you're a horse facility of some sort and you'd like a therapist to work out of that facility, meaning lease space, sort of office space, or if you are a licensed provider who's interested in incorporating horses, what steps to take. As you can tell, we are sort of big on science here, we're big on professionalism. Those things are true in any area where we incorporate horses in professional services, meaning you have to have training, you have to have supervision, you can't just do things, and you have to ask people about their experiences, not just rely on the words they say from earlier. And again, we had lots of questions about everything from the where the horse favors looking at a person, from horses being portrayed in movies and TVs and how that impacts even how we understand their vocalizations, and other great topics that I just wanted to highlight that those questions were received. But at this time, we are going to have to hand it over to Marina, who will close out our first day of the symposium. 2 more days, which is exciting, lots more conversation. Thank you again, Dr. Merkies, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nina and Dr. Merkies. And thank you to all of you who have joined us to embark on this learning experience about the role that horses can have in human health and learning. We hope that you will join us tomorrow for the session about therapy and Wednesday to learn more about horses and education and adaptive riding. Please take a few moments to fill out the survey via the link in the chat. Your feedback is important to us and will help us to plan future equine industry symposiums. If you'd like to learn more about the BBRM Equine Management Program, you can visit the University of Guelph website under Academic Programs and Bachelor BioResource Management. The link will be in the chat as well. To start tomorrow's session, we will be announcing the winners of tonight's prizes. Make sure you join to find out if it's you. Tomorrow's session will focus on therapy services that include horses. Dr. Katie Schroeder, a mental health professional, will discuss how equine interactions are incorporated in the process of psychotherapy. Sarah Michelle Senecal, an occupational therapist, will give an overview of how equine movement is incorporated into occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech-language pathology. On Wednesday's session, we will focus on learning services where horses are featured. Lynn Thomas, CEO of Arenas for Change, will discuss ways that interactions with horses can contribute to social, emotional learning and personal growth. The session also tackles the confusing topic of adaptive riding, where Haley Edwards, Cantra Senior Instructor, will explain what adaptive riding is and is not. Thank you again to our guests and speakers and our partners and sponsors, Ontario Equestrian, Equine Guelph, our official media sponsor KX 94.7, Schley Satellary, and Golden Horseshoe PEMF therapy. Again, please take 2 minutes to provide feedback via the link in the chat. Have a great evening, and we hope to see you tomorrow and Wednesday.